Greetings to all of my star leaders. I'm so glad to have you in this lesson today. We're going to be covering my employee handbook. So this is the latest handbook that I used in my program. Now I'm going to go through it line by line with you. However, I won't read everything because there are many things that are self-explanatory that I'm sure you are already using or you plan to use. But there are a couple of things I want to make sure that you have integrated into your handbook because they will help you serve better and serve well. And so let's go ahead and get started. So I won't start from the cover page. I'm going to go right into the contents. And so as you can see, there are numbered topics. Now, as we go throughout the handbook, you will no longer see those numbers because this is an editable form. If you decide you want to go ahead and get this fully loaded handbook, then when you make the purchase and you download it, you'll be able to make whatever changes you want. So you see them numbered here. However, when you get it, I'm almost certain you're going to make several changes to it, and this way you can renumber them the way you like or not number them at all. Some of them aren't numbered. I do recommend numbering them and numbering the pages because it just helps your client, I was going to say customer, your client find what they need to find a lot faster. And this can also be uploaded onto your internet, or not your internet, but your web page, your website, your app, whatever electronic devices or platforms rather that you use to make sure that your clients can get quickly to this information. You will be able to upload it on whatever platform you desire. I also recommend uploading it directly to your parent portal. We've spoken before, and as of the date of this video, I've always used, once I started using an online platform, I always used Teachable as my parent portal, but I use a platform where I can edit my forms as well and create them as electronic forms. And I believe that we have spoken about that also. And so if we haven't, you're going to get to that lesson at some point, but it is Jot Forms, just to let you know. But I believe we've spoken about that, or we should have, if you're up to this point in your training. But I'm not going to hold you any longer. Let's go ahead and get started in this handbook. So I'll go through all of the topics and then we'll open the book and go through the book together. All right, so starting off, you have your introduction. Then we go into handbook disclaimer, welcome message, changes in policy, and then we get into general employment, at will employment, immigration law compliance, equal employment opportunity, employee grievances, internal communication, outside employment, anti-retaliation and whistleblower policy, 90-day onboarding and probationary period, employment status and record keeping, employment classifications, personnel data changes, expense reimbursement, termination of employment, and under that we go into alternative disciplinary actions, layoffs, shift changes, working conditions and hours, company hours, emergency closing, parking, workplace safety, security, meal and break periods, break time for nursing mothers, employee benefits, holidays, bereavement leave, military leave, workers' compensation, crime victims leave, election duty leave. Let's see what's next. Emergency paid sick leave for COVID-19, public health emergency leave, expanded family and medical leave, paid sick leave, unpaid time off, also shortened to UTO, enrolling own children, training and professional development, employee conduct, standards of conduct, disciplinary action, confidentiality, personal appearance, workplace violence, drug and alcohol use, sexual and other unlawful harassment, telephone usage, personal property, use of company property, visitors in the workplace, computer, email, and internet usage, company supplies, performance evaluations, behavior management policy, timekeeping and payroll, attendance and punctuality, timekeeping, paydays, payroll deductions, attendance and punctuality, suspected child abuse and neglect, mandated reporters, relationship expectations, staff-parent relationships, staff relationships, and staff meetings, marketing the center. Marketing the center. All right, so let's go into the actual handbook. Again, I will not read every line. We are going to, however, go over each topic. And if there's something that I want to impress upon you about that particular topic, I will go into a little more detail about it. All right, so first you have your introduction. Now, mainly, and I'm sure that you have this, but let me just go over it because we also have in this particular academy new individuals, new childcare leaders who haven't started programs yet and may not be aware of some of the things that we need to be sure we include into our employment handbook. So let's get started. So under your handbook disclaimer, what you mostly want to talk about is the fact that this is a guideline that you use, and whatever is in the current handbook supersedes the previous handbook. And so it's important for you to let your team members know that when you give a new handbook, the old handbook is now outdated. And so in the front where your cover page would be, you would need to indicate that this is a revision and the date and month of that revision. Well, the date of that revision. So here you're just pretty much talking about that. You're also explaining that termination can be done by yourself or by the employee for any reason without cause. Now, there are some stipulations when it comes to the employee, which we'll get into at another time. And so the handbook talks about what it covers. It just kind of gives a disclaimer and an overview. And so I definitely recommend having a handbook disclaimer under your introduction. All right. Now, the next portion is going to go over the welcome message, which is a simple general message that you can leave that covers every individual who would be receiving this handbook. So it's not specific to any particular employee. It's basically a letter from you to any of your employees, letting them know that they are valued and how you feel about them being connected to your business and what this handbook is going to serve, how this handbook is going to serve them. Now at the bottom here, under that, changes in policy, you pretty much just let them know that changes are going to be inevitable. There's nothing that you can do for many of the changes that take place. And it's important for you to state that here. And so you let your team members know that you have a right to interpret, modify, suspend, cancel, dispute, with or without notice, any of the policies, procedures, or benefits that are inside this handbook at any time. Again, I won't go over all of this. Some of it is self-explanatory. Now, it does let them know that no one has the authority to change anything in your handbook except for those who are approved, which should also be listed somewhere in your handbook. Next, general employment. Under general employment, we're going to go over a couple of things. Number one, at will employment. And so for my particular state, employment with my child care facility, with my school, is at will. And so that means that at any time you can resign, or at any time I can dismiss you as an employee. And so make sure you check your employment laws for your state. I don't want to speak to them because I don't know what they all require. And so some of the information you see here is going to be based on my state. Now, in addition to that, it goes again into explaining that anything in the handbook can be amended, modified, and that's at the will of the manager, CEO, whoever. So I know that some of this seems to be repetitive, but it's important for you to repeat certain things. I promise you, you will not regret doing that. Next is going to be the immigration law compliance. Now, you may be able to copy and paste, but make sure you read over this. This is going to be important because let me just rewind for a second, because one of the things I wanted to tell you in the beginning of this training is the importance to incorporate things that you don't even think are necessary for you. There are items in my handbook that I've never experienced. There are items in my handbook that I may or may not use, but the purpose for doing that is so that I can limit the number of revisions. Because, and I'll give you an example, and we'll get to this later. If you conduct evaluations for your employees, which you should be doing, one of the ways I personally conducted evaluations is to incorporate images from cameras, phone calls that came into the business line. And so Even though you may not do that, maybe you don't have a security system where you take footage from the cameras and you utilize that in your evaluations. If you don't do that yet, I would still incorporate that into the handbook because, in a few months or the following year, you may incorporate cameras, a camera system. And I highly recommend that you utilize that for your employee evaluations when it's time to evaluate them. And so that's just an example. So when I come across something and your thought is, we don't use that, or I might not need that, I want you to take on a different mindset when it comes to that. And so immigration law compliance may seem like something you may not need or something that you may already have, but I highly recommend that you read over it and assess whether or not you want to include it into your handbook. It may never apply, but it's in there. Your employee handbook serves a couple of reasons, which you may be aware of, but I want to talk to you about something that I believe you should focus on when you are putting your employee handbook together. Now, it should serve several purposes. Number one, obviously, it's going to detail your mission, your vision, what all of your values are. It should communicate your policies and expectations. It also ensures consistent enforcement of policies, of your company's policies, rather. It sets expectations for employee conduct and performance. It addresses employee expectations. It minimizes risks, and it helps minimize conflict. And so it's an educational resource for your employees. It's an HR document. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because many times you may see in employee handbooks for childcare programs or schools or preschools that also add in information pertaining to their classrooms, like detailed information about how to manage classrooms, and that sort of thing, curriculum, those types of things. I don't believe that those are the items that you should put into your employee handbook. And so an employee handbook serves a different purpose. Now, those other items are super important, and we're going to talk about how to incorporate those into onboarding. But you want to keep your employee handbook free from the particulars of the day-to-day, because the particulars of the day-to-day can change quite frequently. In addition to that, you may have multiple locations. And so a day-to-day activity that you may have in one of your schools or one of your preschool locations may differ from that of another. And so there are some things I recommend that you add in a different type of folder or handbook or well, I guess that's basically what I mean, just separate. And so some of what you see here, you may wonder why it's missing certain things, but there is a reason for that. And so I want you to keep your employee handbook as clean and professional as possible to utilize as an HR document. Let's continue on. Equal employment opportunity, which is something that should be a requirement in your handbook for your employees. And of course, I'm not going to go over that because you have either worked a job or been in business long enough to know the importance of making sure you have a statement explaining that you do not discriminate. And so, it's there, but we won't spend any time going over that. Employee grievances, and I'll just read this first section. It is the policy of your school, if you choose to use this, to maintain a harmonious workplace environment. And I have my school listed here, but your school should encourage its employees to express concerns about work-related issues, including workplace communication, interpersonal conflict, and other working conditions. And so this allows your employees to know if they have a grievance, you want to hear about it, and it's a safe place, and they really need to be able to come to you to talk about any discrimination, any sexual harassment, or other types of harassment. This just goes into detail about how and why that's important for you and for your company to take care of. The next portion is internal communication. This talks about the types of internal communication that you make available to your employees, the systems that you use, and how you want them to utilize those systems. All right, outside employment. This talks about employees may hold with outside jobs, as long as the employee meets the performance standards of their position with your school. And so this is, you may or may not want to use this. I have reviewed client employment handbooks many times. I've had them brought to me for review. As a business owner, I have gone through many employment handbooks because we're constantly revising depending on new ideas, changes, or experiences. And so you may or may not want to make a statement about outside employment. I highly recommend that you do, because you always want your employees to understand that, they may have other assignments, other jobs, but if it takes precedence in such a way that it causes their performance to be low in your school or your program, that could be a problem. And so I recommend having a statement about that. Let's go forward. Anti-retaliation and whistleblower policy. Now, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but let me tell you why this is important. It lets your employees know that they are protected from even you. And for instance, if an employee in your facility makes a complaint about something that is legit, like say you have nails protruding out of the wall, and that's a safety violation, and you don't do anything, the manager doesn't do anything to take care of that safety issue, and they report it, this anti-retaliation and whistleblower policy pretty much just states that their job is going to be secure, meaning they aren't going to be isolated or treated unfairly for any reason because of the reporting that they chose. And so it holds the manager, the childcare facility responsible if they retaliate. And so I definitely recommend having something like this in your handbook, because it actually eases the minds of employees who are, they care about the environment that they work in. And so they want to make sure that if they complain about something, it will not put their job in jeopardy, or they will not be treated unfairly. All right, let's move on from that. Next portion is the 90-day onboarding and probationary period. I'm pretty sure at this point in the academy, you have heard me speak about onboarding. I believe that the probationary period, which is what it has generally been known as, should be changed. It should be termed as onboarding. Now, as you can see on my handbook, I left both because as a trainer and as a coach, I want to make sure that you understand what this 90-day period of time means, what it represents. The first 3 months of employment is a probationary period, but it's also your onboarding period, which is more important for your new employee to understand. It's the time of their experience with you where they are being onboarded, they are being trained, all the ins and outs, roles and responsibilities, guidelines, center policies, procedures. Those things are very important. Now, it is a probationary period, and so you may have a policy in place where there are guidelines, and if they falter in any of those guidelines, it could jeopardize their continued employment with your agency. So the first 90 days are super important, and you may impose a few guidelines that are a lot harsher, for the lack of a better word, than they are after the 90-day period, after the onboarding period. And so those are all listed there, similar to what you may already have. I do recommend that you look over them though. And of course, this is a video, so you will be able to pause it and take a closer look at all of this if you desire to do so. And again, this handbook I'm going to repeat this again later. The handbook is available to you for purchase if you just want to get the editable handbook and make changes to it that way as well. But if you just see a couple of things that you'll just go in and add to your handbook without doing that, no problem at all. All right, employment status and record keeping. So this talks about employment classification. So whatever yours are, you want to go ahead and add them here. In addition to the statements explaining what classifications mean and the purpose for classifications. So for instance, full-time, part-time, temporary, those are some classifications that you may use. If you utilize them, just make sure that you have a statement here explaining what that means for the employee. Next, personal data changes. And so this lets the employee know that they are responsible for updating you when any personal data changes, such as legal name, mailing address, telephone numbers, beneficiaries, exemptions on tax forms, emergency contacts, training certificates, professional licenses. And so if there's something else that you require them to update, of course, you would just add another bullet point here. Or certainly, if there's anything there that you don't need to know as an update, you will remove it. Next, expense reimbursement. This just talks about your policy on reimbursing. If you do not allow employees to make purchases, then this may or may not apply to you. But remember what I said in the beginning. Sometimes something may not apply now, but it may apply later. Now, if you have a situation, not a situation, but if you have that benefit in your program where you do reimburse your employees for purchases that they make, you need to be detailed and specific about how they will receive reimbursement. I also highly recommend that you make it clear that they will not receive reimbursement unless they follow your protocol that is in place, and you've got to have a protocol in place in order to do that. Let's move on. Termination of employment. Now here, you're going to go into detail about that. Well, actually, there's another place where we go into more detail, but right here, basically the statement you're making is that termination of employment is an inevitable part of personnel activity within any organization. So it's not, something new to childcare. It's just something that's part of working. It's part of the personnel activity anywhere. Next, we go over notice of voluntary separation. And so if an employee has to separate from you, because of whatever the situation is, it is important for you to ask them to, or require them to give at least 2 weeks written notice. That's going to look good on their part as a professional, but it's also going to give you an opportunity, as you may already know, to fill that position. Okay. Next, return of company property. What are your guidelines when it comes to company property? Have you given uniforms? Do you require those uniforms back? Have you given keys? I'm sure you will require those back unless you change locks. So whatever it is you extend to your employee to utilize during their work experience with you, how do you want to receive those things back? It needs to be listed under this particular section. Excuse me. All right, final pay. Excuse me, tongue tied today. Final pay. Do you have any stipulations regarding final pay? And I'll give you an example. In my program, we've gone through many different processes when it came to uniforms. However, they were all accounted for. They were numbered. There was a form that was signed indicating that you received a certain number of items, whether they be shirts, pants, vest, sweaters with logos, smocks, whatever it was. They were all numbered, and each staff member signed off on the items that they received. Now, those items needed to be returned back, as we just discussed, under return company property. And if they weren't, those items would be billed to the employee by being removed from the final paycheck. And this is, again, something that they were aware of and had to sign off on, not only here in the handbook, but also on the separate document that we used, where we itemized every single item that we gave or loaned for use during their time as an employee. So if you have something like that in place, be sure you put it there. I was going to give you another example, but I believe I'm going to get into that later. Benefits upon termination. So if you have benefits that you utilize that roll over or that will be extended to the employee after their employment, you would list that here. For instance, if they had paid time off that rolled over that was owed to them, how are they going to get that benefit? Okay. Next, layoff shift changes. Now, I highly recommend that you incorporate this here because one of the things that I always make clear to my staff members and to my employees is that because of the nature of really any business, but in particular childcare functions based on the students that are enrolled into the program. And so if you do not have spaces that are filled with students, you may or may not need extra assistance in your classrooms. And because of that, it's important for employees to know and teachers to know that you may have to lay off for a period of time, or you may have to change a shift for a period of time or indefinitely. It just depends. Either way, whether you need to do it or not, have that statement in your handbook because you may never know when you're going to need to refer back to it. All right, let's move on to working conditions and hours. Here's where you're going to list your company hours. You're going to list what your emergency closing process is or policies. What about parking? Where should I park? Is there payment for parking? What are what's the protocol or guidelines when it comes to parking at your facility? Workplace safety. What is your policy there? What are the requirements? If you're utilizing any statements from OSHA, I would definitely encourage you to incorporate that here. Complaint and reporting procedures. So how should I complain if I'm your staff member, your teacher, your employee? What's the process for that? Who do I complain to? What's their name? What's their address? What's their phone number? Retaliation prohibited. And so this goes back into that again. We talked about it a little bit before, but I'm going to read this one. Your school expressly prohibits retaliation against anyone who reports unsafe working conditions or work-related accidents, injuries, or illnesses. Any form of retaliation will be subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment. So this is for anyone in the facility, okay, who feels like they are under retaliation for reporting something that should be reported. Moving on, security. This goes into what your policy is as it pertains to security. Facility access. How is your facility accessed? Are there keys? Are there keypads? What is the protocol? Make sure you inform your new employee or your old employees, whoever receives this handbook, what the current policy is. Closing procedures. What are your closing procedures? List that all here. It's very important that it be listed here and elsewhere, okay? You want to make sure that your policies and procedures aren't just found in one central location. They should be found throughout your facility. Some of these items should actually be posted, such as closing procedures. I would also recommend if you utilize a staff book, like a classroom management book, which I recommend as well, that is also listed there. Meal and break times. This goes into detail about that. What is considered a break? When are my breaks paid? When are they unpaid? Break time for nursing mothers. For nursing mothers, there needs to be a clause about that in here. Where do they go? How do you accommodate those employees who need to express breast milk during the day? If you don't have a special place for them, make sure you incorporate that. That is the sign of a quality program. And not only for your employees, but what about your moms that need to come in, your clients? Be sure to have a place for them. It doesn't matter what the size of your program is. You can create a safe place and a quiet place for a nursing mother. And if you want, just as a side note, some ideas about that, be sure to ask those questions when you have your success call, your hour call with me. And as a matter of fact, hopefully you're taking some notations about certain things that you want to bring up during your call. Next, employee benefits. Now, first we go into holidays. What are the holidays that will be off or paid. Now, in my facility, we paid for all holidays, and that is an employee benefit. That should be listed as one of your benefits. But here you would list what all of those paid holidays are. Now, there are some holidays that may not be listed because my staff were expected to still come in because we utilized it for training days, or we utilized it for what we called beautification days, which is where we came in and we either flipped classrooms or we did a little deep cleaning in some of the classrooms or some of the rooms. And so there may be some holidays you may not see here, and it's because they still were required to come in. The ones that are listed here more than likely were the holidays that were off, or certainly that the center was closed. Bereavement leave, how do you handle that? Who is able to use bereavement leave? Leave all of that information here. And I also recommend that you go to your Department of Labor also to read about their stance on bereavement leave. All right, military leave. Look over that and incorporate. You can either copy and paste it, or, well, you can't copy and paste from this form. But certainly if you do decide to get this handbook, you can copy and paste it into your handbook, or you can make whatever changes you need to make. Jury duty leave. Have a clause about that as well. Workers' compensation. Okay, again, I remember telling you in the beginning I wasn't going to read over all of these. You have access to this information at any time. You can also go to your Department of Labor's website and copy and paste from there, or take some information from there that you need to incorporate into your employee handbook. Crime victims leave. Now this just goes into details about any employee and the fact that they may be entitled to a reasonable amount of leave if the employee is a victim of a crime. So such leave may be taken to attend all criminal proceedings related to the crime. And so be sure you have something in place for that as well. Election duty leave. And so if you have an employee who is going to be an elected officer, they have to participate. What is your policy on that? Now, some of these topics that I'm getting ready to get into now may be null and void. When I put this handbook together, I adopted some practices that were related to COVID-19. And so they're pretty much outdated, so I'm not going to read them. And as a matter of fact, you don't need to incorporate these. Now, there are some things related to pandemic situations or occurrences that you do need to put into your handbook that are general statements. These items weren't general statements. These were some of the laws that went into effect during that time, during 2019 and 2020. So these do not pertain to you now. And so I'm going to go ahead. I just didn't take them out because I didn't really need to do that. I can just tell you not to incorporate them. And so we're going to go through those. All right. Let's see here. Still talking about COVID-19 here. So I'm going to keep going over that, or going past that rather. It goes into FMLA, which may not have anything to do with you unless your program has a certain number of employees. And so it did not pertain to me at all due to the size of my location. Again, go to your Department of Labor websites to look over, to read about all of this. It's important for you to know this. You don't ever want to be in a situation where it is having a negative effect on your business simply because you didn't know what you didn't know. And so definitely visit your Department of Labor's website and read over it. Now, when you visit that website, visit it understanding that it's set up to protect the employee. It's not necessarily set up to protect you, but it's going to give you some valuable information that you need to know about being an employer. All right, let's keep moving. I don't believe we need any of this. This is still talking about FMLA, possibly COVID-19. All right, so let's go into paid sick leave. Now, you may not offer paid sick leave. I recommend that you consider it. Simply because it's another benefit. And if you operate a program that cannot incorporate benefits such as health benefits, dental benefits, retirement benefits, you can still offer benefits benefits, okay? Those are not the only type of benefits that there are to offer employees. There are many others. And so this is one, I've gone over one on a prior page, but paid sick leave is also another great benefit. This is something that I offered my staff members. Now, there are a lot of details and there are a lot of stipulations surrounding it. So you want to make sure it can't be abused, but it is a wonderful benefit to offer. And so you can certainly look over that. You can pause and look over that if you would like. Unpaid time off. Now, this goes into detail about what that means. And so sometimes your employee will require time off, and it's something that they should be able to take if necessary, but you need to have some guidelines and some requirements surrounding it. And so again, this is a place where you can pause and read over this to see if you would be in agreement with that, or if it's something that you would like to adopt to use within your school or your program. So be sure that you look over that as well. If you do not want to offer anything surrounding it, fine, but I recommend that you do. Okay. Enrolling own children. This may or may not be something that you would utilize. If you don't allow employees to enroll their children, obviously you would need this clause here. If you do, I recommend that you don't just take them in. Have a clause or a statement about how you want to handle that for your employee, because there are going to be some differences, okay? It's a totally different setup. Now, they may be required to pay the same tuition, but it's a different situation. Their parent is in your facility. And so you want to make sure that whatever guidelines you have set up here are listed in the handbook. Now, this goes into something I told you I was going to tell you about at a later date. When I was giving you examples of situations where you might need to remove pay from a final paycheck. So if you have it set up so that you remove the tuition from that employee's pay through you, if they haven't paid you, then, or if they have any monies that are owed due to their child being enrolled, for whatever it is, field trips, tuition, whatever it is that they need to cover, this will be another situation where you would remove it from a final paycheck. They would know in advance because they would have to sign off. There's a waiver they would need to sign. Okay. All right, training and professional development. Our facility was extremely big on training. And I believe that I may have gone into more specifics with you about having a teaching center. Now, when I say that, I don't want you to think about the children. Yes, the children are there. They're going to receive education. But I also want you to consider utilizing the statement of having a teaching facility when it comes to professional development and training. Okay, so the hours that you see listed there in bold were my requirements for my teachers. The state's requirement was much, much lower than that. The state that I am in only required 16 hours of training per year. If you were a leader, they required an initial 24 training hours. However, after you obtained that initial 24, the next year you were down to the 16 again. And so that's not enough for me. And 30, I could argue, may not be enough. But at any case, our goal was to exceed licensing regulations, licensing requires, especially when it came to professional development. And again, that depends on your goal. What is your avatar for your employee? If you want someone that is educated, and that doesn't mean they had to have attended school for 4 hours, 8 hours, hours, years, 4 years, 8 years, whatever it may be. You may not require a doctorate or anything like that. However, ongoing training and professional development should always be a goal, irregardless as to where the location is. They just need to be getting it. They are leading, guiding, facilitating your classrooms full of students, okay, who are sponges. And so you want to make sure that your staff members who are working with the children have as much information about childhood development and working with children as possible. And it needs to be ongoing because there's constantly new developments occurring, okay? You always want to make sure you're on top of whatever the best practice is during that time. All right, let's move on. All right, let's see here. As you can see, I continue going on and on about training, so I'm not going to read any more of that. Employee conduct, that goes into what your standards are. What are your standards when it comes to conduct? Okay, list all of that here. I believe that we've spoken before about having a code of honor. There should be a team code of honor. And whatever that is for you, that needs to be listed in your handbook, okay? So what's your standard of conduct? What's your standard? All right, don't assume that any person working for you understands what your standard is unless it's written. Okay, that's very important. I know one thing that my coach constantly said years ago was that what is written is what matters. Never assume. Disciplinary action. What are your guidelines, your procedures, your policies regarding disciplinary action? It needs to be listed here. Employees should never be in a situation where they're being disciplined or receiving a disciplinary action that you didn't discuss with them. Okay? That's not professional. It is not a good look as a leader. And so make sure whatever your system is in place, and there should be a system, be sure that you add it here. Let's move on. And so go over your violations. Now make sure you mention that they're not limited to this, okay? Because you may come up with some more depending on experiences that you have. And again, as I said earlier, I didn't experience the majority of this, but it's important for that information to be listed there, okay? So if you have a teacher that joins your team and she used to be sleeping over at the other center that she worked at, she needs to know that when you're here, that's going to be a no-no. You're not going to be able to sleep while you're working. Now, the center or the school or the family day home business that she came from may have allowed her to sleep during naps. Okay. Now, you and I may hear this and think, who's going to do that? But you don't ever want to assume. I am familiar with childcare facilities who did allow their employees to take a nap during nap time. And there weren't that many, and I can't mention who, and maybe it worked out for them, but it's not something that I believe is a professional choice. Okay, I don't think that that's a professional choice, and I recommend that you do not allow that. And so, but in any case, what I'm saying to you is that list those things here. No matter how crazy it sounds, you just never know. All right, let's move on. Now, actually, let me go right back to that because I didn't read it. Alternative disciplinary actions. This is important too because this goes over what your steps are. So in my school, in my location, we had 3: verbal warning, then we had a written warning, and then we had suspension or dismissal. And so you want to make sure you're detailed there. That doesn't mean that's always going to be the order. And I'll give you an example. And this may be a little aggressive and extreme, but I want to make sure that you're following me on this. And so if you have an employee who walks in the building and, punches another employee in the face, again, I told you this is extreme. I've never experienced this, but I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying. And, this either gets back to you or you witness it. That's not going to be a verbal warning. Okay, that's immediate termination. Immediate termination. You cannot come back into the establishment after you have displayed violence to that degree. And so I say again, this is not necessarily the consecutive order of how you would, handle any type of warnings or termination, but they should be listed here and what they mean. Under what circumstance would it be a verbal? Under what circumstance would it be written? And under what circumstance would it be a suspension or a dismissal? Then confidentiality, I'm sure you have that or you are aware that you need to have that. So that's listed there. Workplace violence. This goes into further detail about what is considered workplace violence. I recommend that you add that to your handbook. Drug and alcohol use. Again, never had this situation to occur, but you want to make sure you have information regarding that in your handbook. Okay, and read over it. Make sure that you are in agreement with everything listed here. Would you handle it this way? Never get to a place where you're just copying and pasting just to say that you have something. I want you to read line by line everything here. And if you are in agreement with it, keep it. If you're a little on the fence about it, or you're not sure, or you don't agree, remove it from your handbook altogether. Next, sexual and other unlawful harassment. Don't ever assume it wouldn't happen at your facility. Don't assume just because you may not have males at your facility. And I'm saying things that I've heard before, okay? That it's not something that you would expect to happen. It doesn't just happen at the hand of a male, okay? And so make sure that you have something in your handbook regarding sexual and other unlawful harassment. It's very important. All right. And that's very detailed. So as you can see, it goes into a lot of what that means. What are the behaviors? What's included? All right. Complaint procedure. Again, you've seen complaint procedure a couple of times because you may have a different way that you want complaints handled for a specific thing. And so for sexual harassment, you may have a totally different complaint procedure. And if you do, it should be listed here, so that that employee knows who to contact for that particular thing. And so it wasn't by accident. You just have to be very detailed, okay? Now, let's move on. Retaliation prohibited. Again, this is repeated, but it follows a different type of situation. And so it's important, again, for you to be detailed regarding that particular situation. Telephone usage. What are your guidelines, your protocol, your standard of procedure regarding telephone usage? Whatever it is, listed here. Personal property, how will that be handled? Are you not responsible if it goes lost or missing? If not, put it in your handbook. Make sure it's clear. Use of company property. Do you have any guidelines regarding that? Are your employees held responsible if they damage company property? What can they use? What can they not use? Next, personal use of company property. Do you have any guidelines regarding that? Such as, can you take it off the property? What happens if it's removed from the premises? Company tools. All necessary tools are furnished to employees in order to assist them in their required duties. Each employee is, in turn, responsible for these tools. You need to let them know about that they are responsible for these tools. Tools damaged or stolen as a result of an employee's negligence will, to the extent permitted by federal, state, and local law, be charged to the employee. So again, that's something that would come out of each paycheck or a final paycheck, but it has to be listed here. You can't just remove money without explaining and certainly without getting it signed off by the employee. Care of company property. That goes into your expectation that your employees are taking care of property, in an appropriate way. And so, in other words, I would not expect my employees to walk around with a hammer, hammering in nails that might be protruding. That's not something that I would expect them to do. And so make sure you outline what you would expect and what type of care you are expecting them to have regarding company property. Smoking. Do you have any guidelines on that? Where if I need to smoke, I'm not a smoker. If I need to smoke and I am a smoker and I'm at your facility and I'm employed by you, where can I go to do that? I need to know, obviously it shouldn't be happening inside the building, but some things that you don't think need to be said should be said or written. Remember, what is written is what matters. Visitors in the workplace. What is your policy on that? Can your employees have visitors? Can they just pop up? Can they walk around? What's your stance on that? Okay, if you don't have anything like that in place, I definitely recommend you go and update your handbook right away. Okay, don't put yourself in a situation where you didn't have a protocol behind it, and all of a sudden you have an employee who has a visitor in your school who's just sitting around, and you get upset. You're looking at them, you're not understanding, or you're having to approach them and confront them about it, but there was never anything said about it. And so having a handbook that covers those things is going to be very important. Next, computer, email, and internet usage. What is your policy on that? Be very detailed. What is allowed when using the company's email and the company's internet? What do you call it? Wi-Fi code, or just their internet period. Your internet period. All right. Let's go on into the next one. Copyright and other intellectual property. How do you want that handled? Do you have trademarked or copyrighted materials, copyright written materials in your facility? How do you want your employees to handle those documents, that property? How do you want them to handle it? Do you want them to distribute it? Are your branded items used in a way that's inappropriate right now? How do you want to combat that? However it is, make sure you list it under copyright and other intellectual property in your handbook. Now it goes further into your ECS guidelines, and so that is your electronic communication system guidelines. List everything here that you want them to be aware of pertaining to your company's electronic communication systems. Next, privacy and monitoring. So whatever your company utilizes there, be sure that you list it here as well. Company supplies. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Performance evaluations. Be sure that you're detailed here so that your employees know what to expect for their evaluations. Now, it's very important that you add in, this is something that I wanted to go over with you under performance evaluations that I spoke about a little earlier, but if you utilize security systems, be sure that you put in your handbook that those recordings, that footage could be used toward or for their employee evaluations. And I'll just read the line to you. It's going to be found right here. Observations also may include footage from security cameras or other video recordings, meaning if you set up a laptop or some other type of recording device in the classroom. And again, they need to be aware of this, that you utilize recording devices, video recording devices, and you will incorporate those into evaluations. If you don't have a security system, of course, you can just set up a laptop in a classroom for maybe an hour, push record. They will know that it's being recorded and you're going to utilize it later for evaluations, but make sure that you list that here. Also let them know that you may record phone calls on your business line. For instance, one of the things that you may do is have secret callers call in to be sure that your employees who have been trained and to take phone calls, who have gone through your phone etiquette training, and they are allowed to carry on or conduct phone calls at your facility. Sometimes you might have a caller call in just to make sure that they hear them utilizing your greeting, your phone greeting. Okay, so these are things that you want to make sure that are in your handbook and that they know about it. Unsatisfactory employee, evaluation review. Be sure that if your employee has an unsatisfactory review, that they know what happens next. What does that mean? Okay. Next, behavior management policy. What's your behavior management? Now, this is pertaining to the children. And I remember telling you earlier that there are some things that may be pertaining to children directly that you may not want to put in this handbook, but this is one of them because, well, this is one you want to put in because it's important for them to know what your management policy is. Okay. What is discipline? What is acceptable? What is corporate punishment? What is considered unacceptable? Okay, so be sure that you put those items here. Now, it's going to be somewhere else also, but I would highly recommend that you put that into your handbook as well. Timekeeping and payroll. What is considered attendance and punctuality guidelines? Like what is it that you expect from your employees? Now, I go into detail in my facility, and so I definitely recommend you that you read over that. You may see something there that you didn't consider before, and that information can be found there. You can just go ahead and add it to your handbook, or again, go ahead and purchase this handbook, and then that way you can just copy and paste, or you can just utilize this and pull from your handbook things that you want to move over. Timekeeping. How am I supposed to keep time? Now, my employees had several ways to do that. I'm not going to get into that right now, but what are your policies on that? How do I keep my time? What is my expectation? Paydays. What are my paydays? Where do they fall in? What if it comes on or falls on a Saturday? When would I get paid? List that information here. Do I get paid by paycheck? Am I getting paid utilizing direct deposit into my bank account? List those items here. Now, this handbook, we cover all of it, but our primary mode for receiving pay was through direct deposit. Now, I left information here about paychecks because there may be a reason that I utilize a paycheck for some other reason. And so just be sure that it's listed here so that your employees know that any of those avenues may be used. Payroll deductions. Do you utilize services like Aflac? We use Aflac, and so those funds or payments to Aflac were removed from my employees' paychecks, but I paid Aflac directly. So if you utilize them, you are familiar with that being their option. So read over that. What other type of payroll deductions do you utilize? Do you remove monies for training classes, for locker fees? Like if you utilize a locker service, do you provide the locks? Is there something that they have to pay for? So just think about all of that. What types of things are deducted from their paychecks? Attendance and punctuality, again, we go into some more about that. All right, suspected child abuse and neglect. As you know, we are immediately considered mandated reporters. Once you are caring for children, paid or not, you're a mandated reporter. This goes into detail about that and where they would report suspected child abuse. And in any guidelines that you have regarding that, you would list that here. All right, as you can see, we are nearing the end, and I think I went over too far. Yeah, here we go. Let me get back on track. All right, relationship expectations. Go over your staff-parent relationships. How do you expect your employees to handle your parents and vice versa? Next, staff relationships and staff meetings. How do you expect your staff members and employees to handle each other or relate to each other? And what are your expectations during meetings? At my center, every staff member was required to come to the meeting with pen and paper. It was expected to take, you were expected to take notes. And later, at some point, your notes were going to be necessary for you to have. And so I recommend you incorporate that if you don't already. But of course, you don't have to. Marketing the center. Who's responsible for that? And so list your expectations here. Now, I always made sure that my employees knew that it's the responsibility of all employees to promote the center, its philosophy, goals, and objectives, but it was my responsibility or the director's responsibility to promote the center when it came to marketing. Okay, and so I did not expect my staff members to take flyers or create flyers on their own and submit them on social media or elsewhere. That just wasn't something that they were expected to do. And as a matter of fact, before they submitted anything, they needed to get approval first. It's very important that you explain that to them. I'm so excited about employees who are overly happy about promoting, but you want to make sure that they follow guidelines. Make sure that you have safety measures in place regarding that, because you never know when you might be held accountable for something that was promoted that you didn't even approve, or you didn't know it was out there. So make sure you have that in your handbook. Now here at the bottom, it just talks about the fact that there are some word choices that may be utilized throughout the handbook, but at the end of the day, they mean the same thing. And so if you utilize the center, daycare, classroom, your actual daycare name, if you utilize any of those words or others, make sure, or any abbreviations, make sure that your employee knows that they all mean XYZ. And indicate again who has the authority to make changes to the handbook. Remember, I told you to incorporate some things in several places. All right. Let me see here. Sorry about that. Get to the next page. All right, so the very last page is your signature page. Now, I spoke about this before, but I highly recommend that you go fully automated. Now, for new employees, I do recommend giving them a physical copy of the handbook that is in use when they join your team. But after that, all subsequent handbooks should be available online in your employee portal. It should be available on your site in some manner, or in your on your website. Maybe there's a code that they use to get access to the portal, but this should be an electronic document. That electronic document can be signed. And if you utilize JotForm, I'm always pushing JotForm because it definitely transformed the way that I do business when it comes to electronic forms or automation as well. And so you can certainly upload this to your JotForm account and turn it into an electronic document that can be signed from any device that they are utilizing, and then it's stored in your account. And so if you ever need to refer to it or make print it out, you can do that with that employee's signature, or you can just give the paper copy and have them sign it that way as well. All right, that's the end of our training today for Employee Handbook. All right, and so I definitely again recommend that you utilize your VIP discount code. As a client, you have a discount code if you want to go in and make a purchase for this. It may already be set up to be purchased with the discount already removed, and so you may not even need your discount code. Either way, make sure you get a copy of it, or make sure you review it again, pause the screen, and make changes to your handbook as you see fit. All right, I'll see you in the next training. Thank you, and talk to you soon. Oh, and whatever you do today, make sure you serve well. Ciao.